Hey guys, recently the news just came out about the new class direction for WoW. I am really hopeful that they may achieve what they are proposing, but I'm just not quite sure if they will be able to at this point. Let me tell you why. In their first part of their Dev Water Cooler article, Blizzard first talks about class identity. One area we're trying to focus on across all classes is to better emphasize what makes each class unique and provide greater distinction among their various capabilities, especially when it comes to utility, tools that fall outside of core role functions like damage, healing, or mitigation. Part of what makes you feel excitement and pride in your class is pulling off a heroic moment and feeling the appreciation of your group when individually contributing to a shared success. That feeling is eroded when so many classes bring similar abilities and you feel you're rarely providing something distinctive. More differentiation in this area will create situations where another class can do something that you can't, but you will similarly bring tools to the table that your allies lack. That contrast causes members of a team to be more dependent on each other to succeed, and encourages different group compositions to approach encounters in different ways. Now, in general, this is pretty much a throwback to old school times, like how they have just revamped the old leveling and dungeon experience. Is this Blizzard harking back closer to the vanilla direction of challenge and variety over simplicity and efficiency? Well, for one, more skills would be definitely great for the leveling experience. The current pruned version just makes it long and grindy. But here's the main sentence out of all of this. Tools that fall outside of core role functions, of which the point of these tools is that they have to be impactful and unique to only that class. In the past, we had so many things. Passive abilities that made you feel your class was significant just by being there. Paladin auras, Mark of the Wild, Mark of Fortitude, Leader of the Pack, Warrior battle cries, Shaman totems, and so on. Today, there are almost none of these. The terms buff up before the boss has been relegated to just drinking your flask and eating some food. We also had active abilities that made specific classes extremely valuable during specific situations. For example, back in Molten Core, there was a fight where warlocks were absolutely essential because of their banish abilities. Today, Agrama kinda mirrors this fight somewhat, but his ads can be CC'd with a whole variety of abilities from almost all classes, from stuns and slows to pushbacks and traps. The main question then obviously comes about of, if every class is going to have unique abilities that another class does not, how could the game ever be balanced? There will most certainly be situations whereby a raid group would prefer to bring one class over another. Blizzard is clearly aware of this, as they state that more differentiation in this area will create situations where another class can do something you can't, but you will similarly bring tools to the table that your allies lack. But the pattern that we have seen over the years is that this is just going to result in elitism and unhappiness among the general community, suffocating those classes that are not as useful over those that are. Such a dynamic already happens when Blizzard is doing their utmost best to push forth a homogenized, balanced environment, so there is little to say that it won't become much worse, unless of course some sort of major overhaul to the game design is done. To me, that major haul would be to somehow shift the emphasis away from number crunching and onto actual gameplay dynamics themselves. But more on solutions later. Let's see what Blizzard addresses next about specs. We are also looking at different specialization strengths and weaknesses in their main role, DPS, healing or tanking, and making sure everyone has something to get excited about and an opportunity to shine. Some DPS specs are bursty, doing fast damage. Some live for attrition, dots, wearing away their target. Some specializations prefer to isolate and drill into a single threat, while others revel in blowing up huge packs of monsters. Basically single target damage or AoE damage. Much of this plays out naturally due to the varying sets of damaging abilities, but we are working more intently than in the past to ensure an appropriate variety and spread of DPS strengths and weaknesses. Likewise, healers and tanks should have a bit more identity through their unique healing and mitigation profiles. So what this essentially means is that out of the 4 ways of doing damage, single target, AoE damage, burst damage, and damage over time, each spec within a class will be more focused on dealing a certain type of damage better than the other 3 types. They didn't cover healing though, but for healing we would have a similar theme: single target healing, AoE healing, burst heals, and strong heals over time. Now, what could this actually translate into for spec design? Could this mean, for example, that perhaps Fury Warriors would be specifically designed to be better at single target damage, and Arms Warriors better at AoE? Could this mean, for example, that perhaps Arcane Mages would be specifically designed to be better at burst damage, and Fire Mages better at dots? Or could this mean, for example, that perhaps Beast Mastery Hunters will be specifically designed to be better at AoE, and Marksman Hunters better at single target damage? Now this sounds amazing for variety and spec identity. I'm an Affliction Warlock and I can do this very well, whereas a Destruction Warlock can't do this very well but brings something else just as equally awesome to the table. However, we already see this dynamic within a spec itself. During raids, players have to constantly change up their talents within their current spec if they want to min-max their damage based on the specific boss encounter. Is this change just going to worsen the current situation, causing people to have to change their entire spec instead of just a few talents for the boss encounter at hand? Would you have to change from Feral spec to Boomkin spec for a boss with a lot of adds, just because Feral was specifically designed to be single target dots and Boomy is AoE damage? Would you have to change your DK from Frost spec to Unholy, just because Frost was designed for burst damage and the encounter is a 10-minute fight that favors consistent damage instead? That sounds terrible. I am all in favor of what Blizzard is trying to do, add variety and significance to each spec, but I really hope it doesn't turn into this. As great as Vanilla was, the nostalgia covers up a huge chunk of the fact that many specs and even classes were outright useless compared to others. In addition, the most common trade-off of homogenization is that unique abilities for specialization will always bring with it a flavor of the month spec, FOTM. This could be disastrous for WoW PvP, causing some specs to become absolutely useless compared to others. The best part is that this is already happening. A great example will be how Outlaw spec in Rogues is pretty much non-existent in Battlegrounds as compared to Assassination because of its very small impact. It's a spec more focused upon crowd control as compared to burst damage, which may seem like a great idea in theory for spec variety and uniqueness, but because of the current PvP meta of CCs being thrown out every few seconds, Outlaw trails far behind in its usefulness as compared to a burst damage spec. Now, focus on what Blizz has said here. We are working more intently than in the past to ensure an appropriate variety and spread of DPS, strengths, and weaknesses. So imagine the problems associated with Outlaw being sidelined in PvP magnified even more. When you magnify strengths, you also magnify weaknesses. Not saying that this will happen for WoW, but it has a tendency to happen, especially in a PvP context where WoW has always been plagued with problems of a FOTM class or classes. But that of course could be due to the simple fact that WoW heavily prioritizes PvE over PvP. And if you notice, nowhere in this article has it emphasized anything about PvP. It says, another part of this approach involves working with our content design teams to collaborate on a world where quests, dungeons, and raids create opportunities for all different types of class strengths to shine. So, all the best to PvPers, I guess, but we already knew that PvP was unbalanced to begin with. I'm an avid PvPer myself, so fingers crossed, hopefully they're somehow able to work it out. But back to PvE. Here's the main contention. Variety would be great, but would it all boil down again to the absolute number, that is, the DPS counter, or the healing counter, or the damage mitigation counter? Would it always become a math problem? The solution thus lies in Blizzard having to find a way to make total damage done not as significant as the way the damage is done. For example, a phase whereby adds need to be killed really fast, bursted down to let burst DPS classes shine. A phase whereby there are several medium-sized adds so that multi-dot classes would shine. A phase where there are so many adds that AoE classes would shine. In other words, making conquering the mechanics of the fight way more important than dishing out large amounts of useless damage. The problem with this is that it's very difficult for every single raid boss fight to be able to encompass all of these aspects. To have a burst phase, an AoE phase, a medium add phase, a melee bursty phase, a range add phase, and so on. And then the same thing goes for healing. A strong single target healing phase, an AoE healing phase, a heal over time phase, and a burst heal phase, all in the same fight. They will definitely be covered throughout the whole raid, but with so many bosses it becomes a very difficult task to make sure every class and every spec can shine as well as the other for the entire raid. Also, we haven't touched on tanks yet. How might they ensure that the different tanks all feel unique and yet feel valued? I think they have currently done a pretty okay job with the balance and variety. At the moment, tanks right now are kinda recognized as having different strengths over others. But problems arise simply because the role of a main tank is so significant. And if they are going to add in even more variety, these problems might be enhanced. If, for example, they go on the current trend and let bear tanks be the health soak pools and blood DKs be the ultimate healing tanks, fights whereby the boss does large burst damage is only going to hamper the blood DK even further, and fights that induce small but frequent amounts of damage is going to be disadvantageous to the bear. This normally wouldn't be a problem, but it becomes a problem for the role of a main tank because, well, he's the main tank. There's only one of him. If he's only good at dealing with a certain type of damage mitigation, then he is inherently not going to be good at certain bosses. And this becomes a big problem for progression raids if you're a tank that won't be very good at tanking the last raid boss of a tier. So what's the conclusion here? My own personal opinion, I love the fact that they are bringing back variety. Not necessarily complexity, but variety. The two can be mutually exclusive. But seeing how it used to work in the past with severe spec and class discrimination, and how that still exists considerably even with today's emphasis on balance and homogenization, I am really crossing my fingers super hard that somehow what they are trying in theory is going to work out in practice for BFA. In a nutshell, the main negative repercussions would be 1. Certain classes will be more powerful than others for certain bosses or encounters, resulting in severe class elitism, especially for the final raid bosses or any really difficult content. Unless of course they make every fight so varied with multiple stages that every class can shine. They have done that somewhat with Argus pretty well. But seeing the over a decade pattern that Blizzard has done for PvE boss design, some bosses will be solely single target, others AoE and so on. So not likely to happen. Number 2, PvP is just going to be insanely unbalanced. Insanely. I really hope it doesn't happen. But definitely there are solutions to these potential issues. Of course, these are just my own opinions and I would love to hear yours. One would be to allow a few classes to have a distinct ability, especially abilities that are extremely important in a PvE context instead of just one class. For example, multiple classes now have battle res, but not too many to erode its uniqueness. The same goes for heroism or bloodlust. In the same way, many classes have their own forms of immunities or damage mitigation, but not all of them have to be divine shields because that ability does not make or break a raid, but the lack of bloodlust or heroism will. 2. For PvP, for battlegrounds at least, go back to the previous theory that they had of mobility versus damage output. If your class is more mobile, it does less damage, and if it's less mobile, it does more damage. Oversimplified as this is, I think if they can stick faithfully to this mantra, PvP will be way more balanced than it is right now. Overall, I really like variety in classes. Having importance and significance in your character and your class is extremely important. I personally did not like the homogenization and pruning that occurred from a characterization aspect, but I did appreciate the outcome of it allowing classes to be played easier and for people to be able to manage multiple alts without blowing their brains out, and for raids to be able to be much more accepting in choosing classes. That being said, it has been 12 years since WoW began. Rather than seeing this as a cyclical thing of Blizzard just going back to square one again, I like to see it as Blizzard learning from the mistakes they might have made and trying to improve the current system. Blizzard has the tendency to pendulum really hard back and forth, going one extreme direction and then in the next X-Pack going the other extreme. Hopefully this isn't the case right now and they are actually going in a direction that is beneficial to everyone. And that's my input for the class design as of right now. Sadly, I'm not holding out too much hope for it, as the only time classes have come closest to being balanced is when they pruned everything like how it is currently. But I hate the fact that we have so few unique abilities, and that classes are just an extension of their roles rather than being unique in themselves. But I may have missed out on some things, so let me know what you think, and I'll see you in Azeroth.